Okay everyone, so in this next lesson, we will be talking about how to use the checkbox value for the input type element. We also want to go and put here a terms and privacy statement. That's why we will be using the checkbox input type element. So let's first try to go and put the markup here. So let's open our code editor here. Let me just close this. Now what I want to do here is to go down here under this section. I'm going to create a label that will contain text that says that we want the user to be remembered once they check the checkbox that we will be placing here. So let's have an input type checkbox, and we want that checkbox to have a name of remember me or remember. So one thing that I want to do here is to also add an ID of remember, just so that we can follow the documentation. Because if we go to our browser here and check our, let me just refresh this first, and there you go, you would see that we have a checkbox here. And if we go to our documentation here, you would see that in the example here, we have an ID that can be used to select the input type here and make it unique in the document, especially for styling. And we have the name here that is usually used for submitting form to the server. So if we try to look at the definition and usage here, it says that the input type with the value checkbox defines a checkbox, and the checkbox is shown as a square box that is ticked once it gets activated. And checkboxes are used to let a user select one or more options of a limited number of choices. And here's a tip here: always add the label tag for best accessibility practices. And now, if you try to look at here, this might be something that you might get confused with. And that's why I actually did some research here. And you would see that there's a value attribute here with an assigned value of bike. So what actually happens there, if you try to go and click that, let's try to see what will happen. So you would see here, if I check that I have a bike here and submit it, you would see that there's the submitted form data that got submitted, and the vehicle one has an assigned value of bike that gets to be received by the server. And again, that's more on the PHP side, so I will not be looking into that for this lesson. I just wanted you to know that's the way on how the server processes the data that you submitted as a user. And that's the reason why we have the name attribute here, vehicle1. And you would see here that we have a value pair that was submitted to the server, and that will be the name of the form or the input type, and then the value, which is bike. Just take note that if we omitted the value attribute here with the value of assigned value of bike, let's see what will happen here. If I click on the checkbox here, you would see that the default value for the checkbox value is on. And you would see here that now it's vehicle1 assigned the value of on. Okay, so for much deeper research about the use of the ID attribute and the name attribute here when using the input type element, I also did some research here in Stack Overflow, and I want you to go through the links that I have given here, and I want you to do your own research again, and then try to read through the discussions coming from senior developers. Again, this is a good way for you to further understand and broaden your knowledge in using the different elements and their attributes and properties. I've done the research with regards to the question about the ID and the name attributes here on what would be the difference when you use it, especially when you're using it while you're applying or you're using the input type element. So you would see here, what is the difference between the ID and name attributes? They both seem to serve the same purpose of providing an identifier. And that's the question that was raised here. And the answer here says that the name attribute is used when sending data in a form submission. Different controls respond differently. For example, you may have several radio buttons with different ID attributes, but the same name. When submitted, there is just the one value in the response, the radio button you selected. Of course, there's more to it than that, but it will definitely get you thinking in the right direction. So if you go through some of the discussions here, it says here ID is used to identify the HTML element through the document object model, or the DOM, via JavaScript or styled with CSS. ID is expected to be unique within the page. Name corresponds to the form element and identifies what is posted back to the server. So at least we're gathering information from the discussions that are being posted here in discussions about certain questions in Stack Overflow. So again, this is the reason why I'm giving you links here, and I'm telling you that if there's a question inside of your mind, it's very important that you know how to query or try to search for answers through the use of the internet. One key thing that we need to do here first is, of course, to place the for attribute. If you remember, there was the documentation that says that we will need to have this label element be bound to the form element that specifies where the label is bound to. So let's say here in this case, for remember, which is the input type element that has the attribute checkbox. Now let's try to go down here below the label here, and I'm going to go and type here, by creating an account, you agree to our terms and privacy. So let's place this terms and privacy inside of an anchor element. Then let me just type the terms and privacy. Let's give this a dead link. So hashtag, and let's apply some color. Let's say color red. Then for the P element here, let me just go and give this class checkbox para 1. Let's go select this and give it some styling here, and give it a value of, or inside of the code block, let's have a property of font size 12 pixels, margin bottom 8 pixels, and I would want the text to be aligned center. So let's first see here if we try to browse our browser here. And there you go. Once we refresh our browser, we can now see here some text of the terms and privacy. Let's go back to our code editor and go back down here. I would also want to give this a class of checkbox label, and I'm going to select this and give this a little bit of styling also. So perhaps we can go and give this a font size of 14 pixels with a margin of 10 pixels. Let's go back to our browser. Let's see how that will look and refresh. Okay. Now let's try to go and add some margin bottom here, so at least the remember me text here will be a bit separated from the terms and privacies here, or term and privacy. So let's go back down here. Let's see where that is. So we do have here the input type checkbox. Let's give it an ID of remember, and we already have that here, so we don't need to actually, let's just here remember, and then let's give it a margin bottom of 15 pixels. Let's see how that will look. Now let's try to go and refresh this, and we can see that it's not working. So let me just check in our inspector here. Checkbox label, and let's see here. Input ID remember. Let me just check here if, let's just go back to our developer tools. Okay, so we can see here that it's a class instead of an ID. So that's the reason why this is not working. Let me just close our developer tools here, because we specified an ID remember and not a class selector. Instead, it should have been an ID selector. So let's see here. Now I would want to move this a little bit to the right. So let's go back to our code editor here, and then we have the checkbox label here. And if we try to look at our class here, that's where that is. So we can go and increase the margin from the top, from the right, from the bottom, and then let's go give this a 14 pixels here. Control save, and just close this. Let's go back to our browser here and refresh, and there we go. We now have some space here for the checkbox that we have here. One thing that I've noticed in our code is that, let me just go back here everyone, and if I look at our code here, we can see that the input element is inside of the opening and closing label tag. Let's go and bring this out here, and let's try to go and put this here and see how that will look on our browser. And there we go. At least the checkbox will be separated from our label here. Now what we want to do is try to go and apply some styling here. Let's say margin left of 10 pixels. Let's see how that will look on our browser. Okay, and then we go and decrease the margin left here. Let's see how that will look. So a bit more, perhaps let's just give this 5 pixels. So you're seeing we're doing trial and error here. At least this checkbox will be aligned in this format from where we have here the password, repeat password, and then the remember me. At least you can control the margin settings of our, or margin properties of our checkbox here, and the label for that checkbox. Now for a final attribute that I would want to include in our lesson for this specific video would be the check attribute, and this will allow your checkbox to be automatically checked. Let's try to do it and refresh, and you would see once the browser loads your page, it will have the checkbox automatically checked. So now the user has an option to uncheck it and recheck it. So that will be all for now, and I'm hoping you learned a lot in this session. So thank you, and see you on our next lessons.